welcome back to the Sleeping Grush podcast. Hello, hello. I'm Matt.
I'm still John.
I'm glad too, because otherwise we're going to have problems. And down at the other end of that table is Jager Madsen, as always, producing for us and doing a darn fine job, I might add. The wonderful episode that you listened to last week, boy, he really had to pour it on to get that one to work. So we're very thankful that he's around. As always, we're brought to you by Cardboard Corner Cafe, Kansas City's premier gaming cafe. So, John, bad guys.
Bad guys.
Tell me about bad guys. One of the things that's always really made me very happy about the Phalon world is that good and bad aren't some sort of a set in stone thing. There isn't one faction that's good and one faction that's bad, and that was one of the things that drew me to the game at first. And now today we're going to be talking about something that really gets into the meat of that. So tell me about bad guys in the world of Phalon.
So we have to go back again to the mists of time.
Oh gosh, it's
Also,
another time
also
travel
known as the
episode.
also known as the late 70s. So
I won't tell you what I was doing in the late
and
70s.
Matt, for the listeners, Matt and I have talked about, what today's subject is. We're going to talk about a particular faction. We're going to get to that in a minute.
We'll get
but,
that in a minute, yeah.
it's hard to talk about that particular faction while talking about the role of villains in Phalon. And absolutely the structure. We've come a long way since the company picked it up and we've done things with it as a DGS team. But it did, as we talked about previous episodes, start as my role-playing world when I was a kid, initially in high school and then through college. So I was influenced by a lot of things that I wrote into it initially that have carried over. Even as we've expanded, some of those core themes have stayed.
Sure.
And like you said, it attracted you, so it must be working.
It is. It's definitely working.
So here's where that came from. So as we said in a previous episode, when I started this, what did we have? We had the white box D&D, we had a made up map. We had blank graph paper and blank hex paper, and we drew our little wood symbols and our little mountain symbols. And, they were all generically named the Mountains of Death, the Forest of Doom, and whatever,
Kind of still how I operate.
Yeah, right. So, and, when I first started that process, I was like 14, so what did we know, right? Not a lot. And what we were influenced by the things in pop culture that we read and saw in the movies and whatever else. I was strongly influenced by Tolkien. Obviously, a lot of us were. D&D was brand new. D&D was finding its way. It's not like it is today where it's got all this depth and all these different realms that it plays in. So D&D was influenced by Tolkien more so then than now. And original settings had orcs, elves, hobbits, men, dwarves, because of that,
Right.
because of Tolkien. So when I set out to start building my fantasy world, I had a single country, which we talked about before, was Falkar, became Falkar. And around the periphery, we had all the things.
Right.
We had the allied free people types, the elves and dwarves and hobbits, just like we read about. And then we had enemies, orcs and dragons and whatever. And so, but I was bothered by some things early on, okay, that I continue to be bothered by, but bothered by in fiction. So it always bothered me, for example, reading about these things, Sword of Shannara, Tolkien, Stephen Donaldson, and others of that type, the big dark lord, the big evil.
Big
right?
evil. Mm-hmm.
So, and you can kind of visualize it even better and talk about it with other people because we have a common frame of reference from the Lord of the Rings movies,
Right.
and other movies. Wheel of
The
Time.
Eye.
Right, yeah. Well, let's talk about Mordor specifically. Who really wants to live there? Right?
Right.
What's the point? So I had two things that bothered me about that, even as a kid, is that you're going to conquer the world and turn it into a festering sandpit of awfulness with a bunch of creatures that, what do? They don't play tennis. They don't go yachting, right? You're going to conquer the world.
They're not farming.
So I was also a fan of James Bond, right?
Yes.
And so James Bond villains, I don't want to, some of them were crazy and want to destroy the world, but the cool ones wanted to get rich, have mansions,
Right.
lots of companionship of whatever stripe. So and so that made more sense to me, right? I mean, why would I want to just turn it all into one big, stinky, dark workplace?
Right.
And what fun is it to be an orc? Why am I signing up to work for this guy? Same thing with certain Bond villains. The minions made no sense, right? There were throwaways,
Right.
right? In uh, Diamonds Are Forever, the guy actually goes to get in his mini sub and make his escape from the platform. It's the enemy headquarters at the end, leaving the minions behind while he escapes. Donald Pleasance playing Stavro Blofeld gets in a little, monorail, goes to some side door and gets away, and you only live twice, and the minions are there to be blown up in the volcano cave. I'm not working for that guy.
Right.
I
Right.
want a,
How
I
many
want a
times has
piece,
he done
I
this?
want a piece of paradise. Yeah. And he keeps doing it. Same dude, right? Same character in the books, the influence books. So all those things did make sense. You went into a dungeon, you knocked on a door, you opened it, and there was a Balrog
Right.
who was
It
there
was just
because,
chilling there.
right? No Nintendo, no Funyuns.
Well, not that you ever found
Well,
Maybe you did get in.
what is this new devilry? Yeah. So, anyway, that I wanted it to make sense. And as I grew, I encountered, and I think people today have even better villains,
Yes.
right? Heath Ledger's Joker,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Loki,
Yeah.
right? And that's what I think is what makes these stories more almost than the protagonist is a good villain. I
Sure.
think that with some of these superhero movies, for example, they fail. It's because the hero is uninteresting. I mean, the enemy is uninteresting,
Right.
not because the hero isn't. So I wanted to have villains that made sense, and that was also part of the theory of writing, where just fantasy science fiction writing, you know, everything that doesn't isn't important needs to make sense, and everything that you need to work that isn't the way it is in the real world needs to be consistent,
Right.
right? So if you're going to make a science fiction world, you got to explain. I mean, a space opera science fiction world, not one like Blade Runner, one where you leave the planet, leave the solar system. You got to have faster than light travel,
Right.
right? Right now, it's all theory. There's no real way to do it.
Right.
So we got to take the big logic leap and then make that your warp bubble, your wormhole, your
Right.
whatever it is, hyperspace drive. You got to make it make consistent sense so your storytelling stays consistent.
Yeah.
But I eat with a spoon, right?
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, tea Earl Grey hot, not like leaking all over the table. It's in a cup, right? And I'm gonna drink with a cup. That all makes sense. Okay, so these villains, let's just throw away they all live in some big dark space, and it's unpleasant. There's no motivation to be there, and then they're all throwaways to the big dark lord, and all he wants to do is evil to the world. Probably wants to party, probably wants a good situation as they perceive it, right?
Sure.
So, and there's going to occasionally be the villain like Alfred says, Dark, just wants to see the world burn.
Mustache twirler.
Right, yes, right. You must pay the rent. Yeah. Um, but I wanted to have the villains make sense, right, as villains, and we will eventually have the big, dark, evil later on in our story, down several years
Right.
down the
Because that exists in the world.
It does exist, exterior to the world,
Hmm.
under the world,
True.
okay, wherever, adjacent.
Adjacent.
But day to day, who are your villains? And so that's where the idea of people are villain enough, people are evil enough, right? There's plenty of that going on. And that plays into a part of the Bright Sword story,
Sure.
which we'll tell later, right? Who the villains are and why they're doing what they're doing isn't to, burn the world down.
Right.
Okay, so do something else that makes sense to them. And the villain is often perspective, right?
Right.
Do they see themselves as villains? So the Traazorite Empire, which is a faction we're going to talk about today, can be perceived as villains, but internally to themselves, what they're doing makes sense,
Absolutely.
right? That's why I created it in the first place.
Mm.
Okay. And I had, already kind of established this sort of classic Western European medieval setting. I didn't want to completely leave behind do something totally new. I had too much invested in it at that point. So Falcar was going to be this classic castles, knights,
Right.
lances, all that
Right.
stuff. Wizards of magic spells, all that sort of thing. So the further you get away from that spot on the map, my intent was to do the wilder things. And I had that whole South Continent to play with, right?
Yeah.
Sort of sketched it out, which you've seen the original high school drawing. You think I
It's
can't,
beautiful.
you think I can't draw today. So, but I also was a big fan of those movies and stories where there was the lost world, the interior.
Right.
I keep picturing those movies that have that, the big plateau, right? And they
We're
scale the
right
big
now.
wall,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. They scale the big wall, and up there is, stop motion dinosaurs,
Right.
right?
Right.
Iguanas that are just, really big in the camera lens,
Yeah.
Journey to the Center of the Earth, Lost World,
Yeah.
all those kinds of things. Um,
Great.
Land of the Lost, also.
Great.
Okay.
Great world building. Great
Well,
storytelling.
so we had this place when I kind of sketched it out. I had this kind of nondescript circle in the middle of the southern continent. Here there'd be dinosaurs.
Right.
Well, what am I going to do with that? Now I got to go make the other parts of it that aren't important make sense.
Mhm.
Okay, so if I'm here, why would I ride one? Well, maybe because they ate all the horses,
Right.
right? So that's kind of we expanded out from there. That gave me my environment to play in.
Right.
And then how are you going to operate? You got to have some evil empire somewhere,
Of
right?
course.
There were different stories I wanted to tell, and when I decided to leave elves, classic trad elves, orcs, hobbits, dwarves behind, right? Um, I at least recognized then that we'd want the elements of them. I didn't
Sure.
want to copy Tolkien, but there was a lot of good stuff there,
Right.
And
Obviously.
so, well, you think, right? Because people latched on to it.
Yeah.
So, and that, we'll talk about Trillius later, but that's, where I was, into Lorien and Mirkwood and all those places. So we need a place like that. I don't want exactly the same story. We want to put our own spin on it. We'll tell that story
Boy,
later.
we've spun
We
it.
have spun that one. It doesn't look like it on the surface. Once they find out what's really going on, it's gonna be great. But with the Traazorite Empire, I also had the idea. We have continued it, but I'm reluctant to say I, but at this point it is I, because
It's absolutely
I'm
I.
19, 18, whatever I am. Of let's have you get it right what you know,
Mhm.
right? And I was a student of military history, and so I knew all these different cultures, the Mongols and the Greeks and the Romans and the whatevers, right? Samurai.
Mhm.
Make those cultures show up where people could relate to them.
Right.
So what they had to focus on was the differences
Yeah.
and not learn 20 cultures that are totally every aspect of every culture is completely new. Are those guys into again what's their religion? If it's a tweak, they are Mongols plus this,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or and minus this,
Right.
whatever.
And can I just, as an aside, say what a brilliant strategy that
You
was?
mispronounced lucky. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Brilliant strategy that was when you were creating the different factions and races, because it's so nice to be able to have something. Well, yeah, I was playing at such and such a place, and we had a demo, and I was playing the Romans were riding dinosaurs.
Right.
We That is exactly what they pulled from it, exactly what they should have pulled from it,
Right.
and we know exactly what they're talking about, right?
Right.
And it's because it was familiar but different.
So the Traazorite Empire itself, then I knew about empires,
Mm.
right, from studying Alexander the Great and the Romans and Genghis Khan and whoever else, the Brits. Anyway, so knew about all that sort of thing. So it's typically not made up of a homogeneous culture. So
Right.
the southern continent would have these subject kingdoms that were part of the, not entirely voluntarily part of the empire, right?
Right.
So you could have tension. You want
We
conflict,
want
right, to tell
conflict.
stories.
Yeah.
So we need tension. So there's going to be some subject kingdoms, but there are going to be some core provinces that are also like the ones in the Buddha of Italy or
Yeah.
Macedonia.
Yeah. Happy to be here.
Right, part of the deal. Maybe benefiting most from the economic and political arrangement.
Right.
Need a Senate, strong emperor, all those sort of relatable things. Maybe tweak the rules a little bit. So where we're going to tweak it? Well, if you start to think about what would be about, sorry, what characteristics can you give some of these players to be perceived as villains by other cultures, but they wouldn't perceive themselves to be villains,
Right.
right? And that took a lot of study. And the
Sure.
one I came up with for the Traazorite Empire is they are patriarchal
Hmm.
in a world where it isn't necessarily perceived to be bad by them,
Right.
right? And we could then contrast the Traazorite Empire with those cultures that have become more egalitarian,
Hmm.
right? And so there's other cultures like Falkar where women and men have equal
Right.
rights, equal stature, which is also counter to the Earth's medieval story. That's also fantasy.
Sure.
You know, we like it better.
Right.
We want to, that's the world we would have wished we had, right?
Right. But not the one that came from it.
Not right, yes. So we could, and we could have different degrees
Yeah.
of enlightenment. We could have some that are further along and some that are more egalitarian for different reasons,
Right.
right? But the hard over one was going to be the Traazorites. So then you could have a reason for somebody to hate them. And we also, I had, and even early on, I was blessed with um, women that were part of our role playing playgroup.
Mhm.
More so in high school than college, but, that wanted to, that taught me about, you know, seeing all this through a lens of, oh, what's this chainmail bikini crap? Right?
Right.
Right? We talked about before,
Yep.
you know, and so what are they going to hate? And
Hmm.
so I asked a couple of my friends that were female gamers at the time, I need to make a villain. Oh, make them, think they're taking care of women, but they're really not. I'm like a pencil. This is great stuff.
That's right.
And,
Keep it coming.
then I realized, ooh, crap, that's a little too close to home. Right? There's a lot going on in the world today that's like that,
Ah,
right? So,
but that's where good speculative fiction gets written
right.
too.
But I've also seen stories and historical examples of cultures where whether they're blind to the problems or it's not really as much of a problem, depending on the cultural view,
Right.
the women in that culture defend it.
Yes.
Okay, it happens,
Yes, it
right?
does.
It's not our place to judge, right?
Mhm.
Um, if outside we see, a woman in a culture like that, you know, or whatever, a person of whatever, either ethnic background or gender situation, looking like they're oppressed to us, and we go into their culture and they're happy with their role. Like, I get to stay home with the kids. This guy's out there getting stabbed by mammoth tusks.
Right.
I'm making light of it, but
But
it's not our place to say.
right.
What we're going to do is we're going to create these different cultures, and you pick the one you want to be part of,
Exactly.
right? That's a menu. Phalan's ultimately a faction menu.
Yeah.
For play style, for cultural identification. What character do you want to be? So, but we could also slip in there some things they were doing that are absolutely pretty much universally going to be perceived as evil,
Right.
like what they do about female casters.
Yeah. So what do
Okay.
they do about female casters?
Well, so if you're in a culture, this is the Traazorite Empire. Now, pattern on the Roman Empire, not entirely the same. Um, there's a mix of the Arab conquest in there
Right.
because it's the religious fervor of the sun priests and the military reforms of the Traazorite blade masters together that allows them to take over the
Right.
whole continent, right? And I was a student of both. I was a student of the Arab conquest, of the 600s and 700s, 800s, and I was a student of, you know, the first time there's a battle between Romans and Greeks. I'm simplifying, but
Right. Right.
the people that show up after the battle are used to the push of pike, the push of spear,
Yep.
the phalanx blocks.
Mhm.
Somebody takes it a little too hard, they run, they get chased a little bit, but the field is ours. And there are some dead, but they're not piled on deep, right? The phalanx meets the Roman legion, it's a Ginsu knife shell.
It's a bloodbath.
Right. And when you come to the battlefield, there's all these hacked up body parts. If you take a pike to the chest, there's a hole. If you get, you know, slapped at by a gladius, you're chopped into bits, right?
Yeah.
And it was horrifying. And it was a changing the view of warfare to the people that ran into it. I just mixed those two things,
Right.
right? Because I had a whole continent to take and not a lot of time to take that, right? So it's a combination of the two stories,
Yeah.
that are the Traazorite rebellion against the Trajan Empire, which is the thing that's down there before them.
Right.
But they're the um, pre-Roman, Greek, Macedonian model pike phalanxes, or even back further, Babylon, Samaria.
Yeah.
Pike phalanxes, big shields, heavy infantry, no sword play to speak of.
Right.
On a grand army military
Right,
scale,
right.
you know. So those reforms in marching and swordsmanship and military organization of legions are, told to the Traazorite
Mhm.
rebellion and ultimately the conquest of the empire and replacing it with a different one, which is what we did.
Right.
We were King Louis, then we were Napoleon.
That's right.
What's the difference, really? Right? To the people,
To what's the
right?
people, right?
So, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. So, um, we wanted to have a place for. We weren't going to have a whole world and not have the empire,
Of course.
and we weren't going to have a whole world and not have the Roman Empire.
Right.
The Senate, all that cool stuff. An emperor, games, Circus Maximus.
Yes.
Um, so that's where the story was told. And what we added to all that was the fact that since we were going to have this southern continent, and in the middle of it was going to be the great, you know, dinosaur generating plateau,
Mhm.
right? That they were going to be native to that, and we were going to put these people on those kinds of creatures. We're not making any statements about whether they're birds or not. That is Earth,
Sure.
right? So they're generally reptilian,
Mhm.
in nature. And they're not exactly our dinosaurs, but they're patterned after them.
Right.
Actual velociraptors, I believe, are much smaller. Can't would support the weight of a man,
Right.
a person. Um, so a velosaur is patterned more after the of a whole. How do I keep this thing fed without eating me? Right? So the whole story about the velosaur cohorts are only brought together in mass units for war because I can't keep these things fed, and I take them to the other person's territory.
Right.
Right? I don't march around the Traazorite Empire
We don't let them loose on the home ground.
or into a subject kingdom.
Right.
Right? Somebody needs a rebellion squash. We call the Velosaur Legion together, and oh my gosh, right? You know,
Everybody's fat and happy.
I haven't even fought a battle yet. All I've done is let them feed. So then we get to have, uh, the place to go explore where dinosaurs are in the wild, our
Right.
dinosaurs are in the wild, and then also them as part of everyday life,
Yes.
military, logistics, infrastructure,
Right.
transportation, food, clothing, whatever else, instead of the horse and the other creatures that we got leather from,
Oxen.
oxen, beasts of burden. Yeah. And so we could mix all those things and we had a whole continent to do it on. And then we could have some of the more enlightened cultures around the periphery be opponents, political opponents of this,
Right.
and not into. And then we could have our rebellion against it, led by women, because you know, why would they not be, right?
Yes.
Why would we not be able to find somebody who's dissatisfied with not being able to run a business, own a business, run a business? They could certainly be part of one. Whole central political office or serve the military,
Right.
which is severely limiting
Yeah.
when they come against the cultures who don't have that, which they run into with Falcar,
Right.
and ultimately Corona rebels.
Sure.
Small population, but everybody's involved.
Right.
Right. So that's where all that comes from, and that's true. As when we learned more about the Grular as part of the Brightsword War, what is their motivation? Are they really villains? So can you be Grular, as a player, be identifying with Grular and not just be, crappy to your fellow person? No, you've got your story to tell. You got your viewpoint.
Right.
A little harder with the Traazorites, but you can pull it off.
You
Right?
can.
Yeah.
You can.
What I'd like to run into my first female player who wants to be a Traazorite and not be an Eclipse, right? Player.
Right.
That would be fun.
It'd be interesting.
Yeah, should have the I can't serve in the military, but she's the patron.
Right.
Right? I like things just the way they are. Let's not mess with it. That'd be fun. But we might just generate that character,
Why
if
wouldn't
somebody
we?
wants
Yeah.
to identify with that. But probably not. Probably they want to be cell leaders in the Eclipse.
Sure.
All students of the Blade Mother.
Oh, yes.
So we have a multi-province. The southern continent is almost entirely covered by the Traazorite Empire, with the exception of the Mershale, the
Right.
Kingdom of Mershale. Some of those are subject kingdoms that aren't culturally Traazorite. But the
Especially further south you go.
yeah, especially for the south. Mishdad is Aram, it's Chuck, right? Uh, and we're going to be telling their stories more and more as time goes on,
We will be very shortly for one of them.
right? Yeah. Um, and the people they beat to take over the continent, the empire that preceded them,
Yes.
the Traazorite Empire, features in the current campaign, evidently, but it's in our past.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. The distant past.
Yeah. So when we ended up with an empire you could perceive to be villainous, they aren't led by a dark lord, who just wants to cover the place in orcs and smoke. And burn crops. What are we eating? That's the thing, they had to make up, D&D had to make up a whole story. We kept running into rooms in the 70s and 80s full of goblins that were dungeon rooms. Where's the bathtub? Where's the food? Right? Where's the light? You open the door, you had a torch, now it was lit. What was it before?
Right.
Right. Oh, they have dark vision. What are they looking at? Oh, they're goblins. There's nothing in there.
Sounds like a party to me.
Right, yeah. So you'd have to create and I think this is one of the stories that they eat fungus. I don't know. I lost track of all that.
That's
So.
that would be another game system, I believe.
Oh, I don't think they
Is it?
originated that. I really don't.
I don't know.
If I went back to the monster manual, the original D&D monster manual, I looked at what it said about food sources for goblins and orcs.
Mushrooms.
I'm pretty sure fungus is involved at one thing. I could be wrong. Readers, listeners, check us out.
That's right. Yeah.
Put us in the comments section.
Somebody needs to set it straight.
Tell us my monster manual is in a tub somewhere in the garage, so I have to dig that out.
So let's delve a little deeper into the Traazorites,
Okay.
and let's talk about the religion.
Okay, right.
It's interesting and different as it goes in Phalon. So, who is it that they're worshiping? What is it that they're worshiping? And how does that inform their everyday life?
So there's two stories there. Okay?
Yes.
There's the story that's relatable from Earth. Of why they're like the Romans, right? There's no Romans in Phalon. That's the way we make it relatable. And there is the story of how that all relates to the Gaul, because ultimately every culture, every religion out there finds its way back to the creator saying, I need to make myself more understandable.
Right.
So, which is all, easily defined on World Anvil,
Yeah.
how our religious story goes.
It's right in there in the introduction to Phalon.
Because of driving the story that was similar to both the Roman conquest and the Arab conquest, the Arab conquest gave me a monotheistic religion. I already had multiple. So where were we going to put the monotheistic religion?
Right.
Okay. Now, first of all, just full disclosure, I'm a Christian, right? So I'm not poking, monotheistic religions from a position of being outside them.
Right. Throwing stones from inside.
I'm absolutely inside the tent. So, but that story is, religious fervor. Historically, those are more dangerous.
Right.
Right. It's just the way it is. Okay. So if we're going to tell that story, make it relatable, the conquests and actions of people zealously following the principles of monotheistic religion have been more dangerous over time than others. That's all we're saying. Okay. So, and also we had the story of we're overthrowing the Krajan.
Right.
Right. So the Krajan are original Gaul worshippers.
They are.
That story is going to get told. They worship the original 9, no kidding, expressions of the creator.
And there's quite a bit of that in the new Devadim.
Right, yeah, we named them. That's right, the Challer versions of their names.
Talked about how they played out within Nevadim, because they played out different everywhere, but
in the different cities of the Krajan Empire.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So, but that's a great. I was going back over that document today when Jeff was pointing out the void agents cost me fire. So anyway, that's another story. So yeah, excellent. That's some excellent work there, and it does tell that story. They, the religious fervor of this new thinking, where these Gaul are pretenders. Why wouldn't we just be focused on the creator? Why wouldn't we be focused on a unifying idea, not be scattered all over the place? That's the story these Sunbringers want to tell.
Right.
And what is the most dominant element in any environment that's of a similar nature to ours?
The
It's
sun.
the sun. So it's the Runa, the sun god, is their version of the lamp, but there is no other version,
Right. There's
right?
nothing else.
You
Right.
know, it's just that's the creator. He made all these other things kind of like to make, stupid people understand them. They're not stupid. So that's their party line.
Right.
Okay. So essentially it is of all the different, we have the 18 animal totems in the Erdogar tribes. We have original Gaul worshippers in the Progeny and also the Khazaric.
Yes.
We have members of those Gaul that have expressed themselves on Phalon because they want more worshippers, like the Great Snake. So we have these other things going on out there, and so, but we needed a monotheistic, one of these cultures, and that was the natural resting place for that because of what it was going to have as a role in our story,
Sure.
right? And so we have, and we could then juxtapose it against the Coronans, who were going to have the same view, a similar view, but of the eyes, which is a man and a woman, and they are, equally balanced.
Mhm.
At least the two moons in the sky. So we could have that, counterpoint.
Sure.
They could be
Sure.
in conflict consistently,
All the time.
and you could choose which side of that you wanted to be on.
Right.
And then of course we could throw a shadow over the sun and have the eclipse rebellion.
Right.
So
There's a strange beep coming
yeah,
from
there's
the
a
way, and we're all just
fidgeting
like,
and strange
what the heck?
noises from the
What's going on?
from the producer's booth. Right down to the- So
All right, so running out of time, so let's talk about where we see the Traazorites going in the future.
well, the Traazorites are not satisfied with their current situation. They want it all.
Which
Right.
ties back into the religion, which we
Yes.
don't have time for, unfortunately. But
Well, we'll do it. Well, let's do a podcast on the religions.
I think
we can come back to it.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
absolutely.
So we'll do a podcast on what our listeners ask for.
Right.
So ask for religions. So very quickly though,
I'm a listener.
it's true. I do listen to all these. Help me again. We were just talking about
Where are they heading?
where they're going.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
sorry.
not satisfied.
I was picturing this trireme headed for Corona. So, which is relevant to this
It is
conversation.
relevant.
So there's when the Crygen originally conquered that continent, right? A Chalor people, but they take control of it all. Then the subject kingdoms they got one emperor, and they're more like Greece and Persia of the ancient times.
Right.
Okay. Samaria and Babylon, etc. And Egypt politically, not, Egypt's cultural areas, Candor for us. But so they conquer the southern portion of the northern continent, a strip, from Falthar Watch to Candor City.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They don't go much further inland because the pressure back from the Simker and Failure peoples is too much. That's as far as they get. And, environmentally, there are natural boundaries there.
Right. Right.
The Bronze Mountains and whatever else. So the peoples of the northern continent eventually take all that back, except Corona, which rebels. And so none of that is Traazorite property. And that just sticks in their craw.
Right.
And so every, so many tens of years, so many hundreds of years, they try another crusade to take Corona back, start with Corona because they want to punish them for rebelling. And it's the closest thing to the Traazorite continent, the southern continent, for logistics purposes. And they will try it again during the Bright Sword War. So they are headed towards another crusade.
Right.
And that's the story.
As far as they're concerned, they're always heading towards another crusade.
Right. Well, that's true. Or recovering from the last one.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like the Ice Age. So we're going to start telling the story of the lead up to what will become known as the Jaguar Crusade. They all have names,
Right.
often named after their leaders. The Jaguar Crusade will be named so because the leader of the crusade is also the commander of the Jaguar Legion.
Right.
So that's where it gets its nickname from.
Awesome.
And as we start moving our timeline forward, we've established this year is 1003.
1003.
As we move our timeline forward, we're going to start telling about the build up to that.
Right. Right.
And then launch it here in a few years. So
Fantastic.
they're headed towards invasion. I reckon it.
Seems like the entire kind of world is heading towards
Conflict.
war.
What? Oh my gosh. It's 1936.
Right.
Right? Ish.
We've all got our dice. We're just rolling them.
Oh, it's time to be Poland again. Boom. Oh, 12. Let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, John, for talking about the Trazzerites today.
Sure.
It's one of the more fascinating factions in the world because of its duality. Is it good, is it bad, and how you can perceive it. So, folks, as always, thank you for listening. If you have any comments, leave them at whatever place that you're listening to us or watching us, if it's YouTube. I already saw some comments on the one that we dropped today, so that's fantastic.
Already?
Thank
Wow,
you.
nice. Yeah.
Keep them coming, guys. We love hearing from you. We love being able to respond. So if you have questions or anything else like that, make sure that you leave them wherever it is that you're listening. Thank you again, and until next time, we'll see you around the table.
Spike and win.